Good Yom Tov. Zachor, remember. In a few moments, we stand for Yizkor, and one of the readings is the 23rd Psalm. I am pained every time I recite this psalm when it refers to the valley overshadowed by death. You see, for the last 24 years, I traveled to the valley of death. It's called Poland. As a child of survivors, I recall the painful stories of my parents about the tragic events that took place during the Shoah. Over the years, my parents told me about my grandparents, my uncles, my aunts, and yes, my little cousins who were all murdered during the Shoah. My father would say to me in Yiddish, "Gedenk mein Sohn und vergess nicht." Remember, my son, and do not forget the 27 family members that were killed during the Shoah. So on days like today, I stand to recite Yizkor for people I never knew. And that's my legacy, courtesy of the Nazis. I proudly serve as the executive director of the March of the Living, which was founded by a Holocaust survivor named Leo Martin. And every year I return to the Valley of Death, leading trips so that others can bear witness of the tragedy and give testimony on behalf of the murdered people. I go because for me personally, it is the ultimate expression of Kaddish for my lost family. Our mission is to provide the resources so that students in our community can participate in the march so that they may bear witness of the tragedy and they may tell the story for future generations when the survivors are no longer with us. There are many of you here today who have made this journey. Our Director of Lifelong Learning, Tamara Donnenfeld, is the lead educator for the Miami March of the Living, and we thank you. We're very grateful. Two of our rabbis, Rabbi Aklepi and Rabbi Barris, have served on multiple occasions as clergy on the March of the Living. So I strongly urge you to join me, and I invite you to come with me at a March of the Living. It is truly a life-changing program. The greatest respect that we can bestow to the murdered Jews of the Holocaust is when we add our voices to those voices that were silenced in abandoned synagogues where once there were thousands praying and singing on days like today. The greatest honor that we can give is to recite Kaddish at places of great terror for victims of the Shoah, for whom there is no one left to say Kaddish. Every year during the March of the Living ceremony, we hear from Rabbi Israel Meir Lau, the former chief rabbi of Israel, himself a child survivor of the Shoah. On a recent trip, he shared a very powerful story about when he was a child, approximately 8 years old, in the Buchenwald death camp. A few weeks before the liberation of the camp, a man named Label was killed, and his 13-year-old son Moshe wanted to say Kaddish for his father. But as a 13-year-old, he did not know it by heart, and he needed a prayer book in order to recite the prayers in the Kaddish. He was told that there was someone that worked in the laundry that had smuggled in a prayer book. So Moshe's plan was to go to the laundry, tell the man that his father was murdered and wanted to use the prayer book. When he got to the laundry, the old man admonished him and told him he was crazy to risk both of their lives attempting to perform any Jewish rituals. And at that moment, Moshe reached into his pocket and he found a crust of bread. And he wanted to trade this food for the use of the Siddur, the prayer book. And he pleaded with the old man, begging him to use the prayer book for just 5 minutes in order to pay respect to his dead father. But the old man refused. He would not take the food from this young boy. He said to him, "You are young, and you certainly need the food to survive. I'm an old man, and I don't really have a future to live for." So he gave Moshe his prayer book. But then he looked at him and he said, "You know, we need a gathering of 10 Jews in order to recite the Kaddish, and there's certainly no minyan here." Moshe looked around and noticed a pile of pajamas from dead prisoners. That only hours before, there were Jews in each of these pajamas, and he declared, "They will be my minyan." The souls of those men who were in those pajamas earlier that day, they will be our minyan. So the two men prayed amongst the pajamas of dead Jews and recited the Kaddish for his father. Moshe uttered the words, Yitgadal v'yitgadash Shemei Rabbah, and the old man answered with Amen. These were the words of Jewish eternity, Jewish immortality, and Jewish continuity that we recite to this day. Today, we are so fortunate to gather as free Jews, as a community, to remember our loved ones on the holiest day of the year. And that, my friends, is Yizkor. That is remembering. I must share a personal story with you. While on a recent march, I had breakfast one day with a few other children of survivors. And they encouraged me to participate in a medical study being conducted by the Michael J. Fox Foundation for Parkinson's Research that included the testing of children of Holocaust survivors from Ashkenazi Eastern European descent. So upon my return, I flew up to Indiana. I followed up on this and signed up for this genetic testing to aid in this important research project and to determine if I had an increased risk for Parkinson's disease. Part of the process includes a lengthy interview with a few doctors and social workers from Indiana University who are conducting this study. The centerpiece of the interview process was seeking information about my family medical history, about anyone that may have had Parkinson's disease in my past. During a conference call, they started asking me about my siblings, and then moved on to my parents and other family generations. As it turns out, towards the end of her life, my mother suffered from Parkinson's disease, but we always thought that it was caused by environmental factors. While prisoned in the Kovno ghetto, my mother was severely beaten for smuggling some food, and on one occasion was struck in the head with the butt of a rifle by a Nazi soldier and left for dead, freezing in the street. Throughout her life, she suffered from the effects of frostbite and had a life full of illnesses that included frequent migraine headaches. When she finally got Parkinson's disease later in life, we always associated her illness as a result of her suffering during the Shoah. I cannot imagine what my parents and other survivors went through during the Shoah. So the interview continued as they went on to climb my family tree and inquire about my grandparents, my uncles, my aunts, and yes, my little first cousins. For each person, I could only tell them that they were killed at a young age, long before any disease had afflicted them. Sadly, I had no useful family medical history that was really helpful for this research study at all. And one by one, we went through them all, until I could hear one of the doctors weeping on the other end of the phone. He stopped and he said aloud that he had counted 27 family members that were killed during the Holocaust, almost as if he were taking a census of my family. I was quite frankly surprised by his emotion, considering the interview of a group of children of survivors that would certainly have similar results. But he said he was new to the interview process and that I was his first interview. Then he said something which hit me hard. He said, "Wow, how do you remember them?" So I explained that my brother, my sister, and I, and our children are named for those who didn't survive. I told them that we recite memorial prayers on the anniversary of their deaths, and that we gather several times a year as a community to recite memorial prayers called Yizkor, prayers for the departed family and friends. I also told them that a big part of it was that we perform deeds of kindness, gemilut chasadim, for others on behalf of those who are not alive today to perform those deeds themselves. This research study reminded me why we're here today. We must remember our loved ones to ensure they are never forgotten. Okay, back to Psalm 23. David HaMelech, the psalmist, writes, "Though I walk through the valley that is overshadowed by death, gam ki elech begeit salmavet," and then goes on to say, "Goodness and kindness shall follow me all the days of my life. Ach tov v'chesed yurdefuni kol yemei chayai." The shadow of death which descends upon us when we suffer the loss of a loved one. But life gives us new opportunities of goodness and kindness and moments of happiness and joy. Recently, we were blessed with the arrival of our second grandchild. My sadness of lost family is eclipsed by the joy of being a grandfather playing with my grandkids. How miraculous it is for my family to have another generation, whose survival was doubtful just 75 years ago. And here is the ultimate revenge on Hitler's plan for my family. Our granddaughter is the 27th offspring. The same 27 people that were wiped out are now replaced by 27 new souls. It took 75 years, but we're even. Yizkor is a precious opportunity to connect the past with the present and the future. As we all rise to recite Yizkor today, we must remember the millions who were murdered during the Shoah, for whom there is no final resting place. For many, they left this world through a chimney. There's no one to deliver a eulogy, there was no one to sit Shiva, and there was no one to recite Yizkor. A very cruel ending to a dignified life. In a few moments, we recite the Mourner's Kaddish. The last sentence is our prayer. It's our wish and our dream. And we say, Oseh Shalom Bimromav, Hu Yaseh Shalom Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael, and I will add V'al Kol Ha'olam. God, who makes peace from on high, should grant peace for us and for all mankind. Never again will we be like Moshe and the old man in the laundry at Buchenwald that had to recite Kaddish amongst the pajamas of dead Jews. Never again. As the famous writer George Eliot wrote, our dead are never dead to us until we forget them. Only those who are forgotten are dead. Those remembered remain alive in our hearts and in our minds. My father's words ring true today. Gedenk und vergess nicht. Remember and never forget.